One thing AFL fans love about our game is that not much changes. You can expect 23 rounds, 20-minute quarters, and daytime September grand finals at the MCG, year in, year out. But of the 126 AFL seasons that have been played, there's one that completely stands out from the rest. One that brought with it bizarre rule changes, a league shutdown, and worst of all, a horrendous grand final. This is the devastating story of the 2020 AFL season, one that no AFL fan will ever forget. AFL fans knew that the upcoming season would be horribly impacted by the pandemic running rampant in Australia. But just how badly it would be impacted, no one saw coming. Just one round into the season, AFL CEO Gillon McLachlan shut down the AFL entirely for an unknown period of time to slow down the spread of the virus, not knowing that his decision would cause a never-ending list of issues for clubs, fans and players alike. The AFL was sent into the biggest financial crisis the game had ever seen. With no revenue from tickets or TV advertisers, how could the AFL possibly afford to pay its players? 1 week after the announced shutdown, McLachlan came up with a solution. He proposed a 50% salary cut, which players reluctantly agreed to. Hawthorn legend Lee Matthews declared he had lost all respect for the 2020 playing group after they agreed to the pay cut, while Richmond great Jack Riewoldt was more understanding, arguing that the players had a massive role to take on. But players weren't the only ones affected by the AFL's lack of revenue. Geelong two-time premiership coach Chris Scott felt it necessary to go without his entire 2020 salary to help Geelong's financial situation, as it was the least he could do for a club that has been so good to him. Saddest of all, up to 80% of staff from every club had to be stood down, and not just ordinary jobs like help desk or customer support. I'm talking strength and conditioning staff, football bosses, and even assistant coaches. People that would have a hard time finding another job. The AFL introduced new rule changes that completely changed how the game was played. The most problematic of these was reducing the length of quarters from 20 minutes to just 16. The shorter quarters created extremely low-scoring games, removing the many last-minute goals that teams tend to score during 20-minute quarters. In no other AFL season are teams regularly scoring only 30 to 40 points each week, like they were in the 2020 season. Even that year's Premier Richmond was held to just 30 points on multiple occasions, with one of them even winning them a game over Sydney, who scored a measly 26 points, further proving just how low scoring the 2020 season was. The season was also cut to just 18 rounds, and obviously less rounds means less footy. To say fans were completely and utterly disappointed would be an understatement. The AFL wasn't the only league impacted by the 2020 pandemic. That year's AFLW season was cancelled entirely midway through the final series, with no premiere awarded. Fremantle were robbed of a likely premiership. They went undefeated for the entire season and dominated the finals, beating Gold Coast by 70 points in the semi-final to claim the biggest finals win in AFLW history. Fremantle captain Cara Antonio says it felt like her heart was ripped out when she realised the AFLW season had been cancelled, robbing Fremantle of their first real shot at premiership glory. All club training was suspended immediately for all 18 AFL teams. 16 Adelaide Crows players received one-match bans for accidentally breaching this protocol, a sign that the AFL was taking the virus very seriously. Players were eventually allowed to train in May, 1 month before the AFL season eventually resumed. And the scoreline of that round showed just how rusty AFL teams were, with Collingwood and Richmond's 36 apiece draw the finest example of this. When the 2020 season recommenced, players from pretty much every club were eventually forced into isolation hubs on the Gold Coast, known to us ordinary folks as luxury golf resorts. But I guess luxury resorts weren't good enough, because Richmond players Sydney Stack and Callum Coleman-Jones were fined $75,000 for leaving their designated establishment after they were involved in a brutal street fight in the heart of the Gold Coast at Surfers Paradise. Crowd attendance at AFL games hit all-time lows. Only 6,000 people per match. No crowd meant no atmosphere, completely ruining the viewing experience for TV viewers. The AFL tried to solve this with fake crowd noise, but that failed miserably. It just didn't feel the same. Combined with the low scoring, the AFL began to get really boring, and I found myself gradually beginning to forget about the 2020 season. That was until the 2020 AFL Grand Final, because coming into the series I had false hope that the Grand Final would be played at the MCG, even if the last game played there had been all the way back in round 5. But of course, the venue chosen for that year's Grand Final was the Gabba, a stadium that could only fit 42,000 people, made worse by the Queensland government only letting 30,000 people in to watch the biggest game of the year. And to make it even worse, the Grand Final was played at night, and while Eddie Maguire was celebrating, happy that Channel 7 would attract more viewers, I was fuming. The best part about Grand Final day is hanging out with your family or mates, throwing on a barbecue, devouring some snacks and watching a great game of footy, with a backyard kick at half time thrown somewhere in there. It's the matchday experience that makes Grand Finals great, something that the AFL ruined. More devastation would come in the actual Grand Final, when Gary Ablett sadly broke his shoulder in the opening minutes, a symbol of the broken season that was the 2020 AFL season.